too.
Sure.
I'm Louis Kolger, and I was in the Philippines. I got into the Philippines about 2 weeks before the war broke out. I was with the 27th Bomb Group, and I don't know really why I even went overseas, because before we left Savannah, Georgia, I had been in charge of the group radio section, and I was told to leave all my equipment as it was, and we'd get new equipment when we got overseas. So when I got overseas, I had absolutely nothing, not even as much as a screwdriver, if we were going to do any maintenance work in our group, our bomb group. But our airplanes were supposed to come on the ship behind us. We were on the USS Coolidge, the bomb group going into the Philippines, and the USS Meigs was behind us bringing our airplanes. We had been recalled off the 1941 maneuvers, and so we were a pretty experienced group. We were actually I guess we were Top Gun. And so when the bomb group arrived in Manila on the, well, I think it was sometime around about Thanksgiving, and our airplanes, of course, were coming behind us, as I said. But the airplanes, during the war broke out, and the airplanes of our group were diverted to Australia. So there they were, 2,500 of us with absolutely no equipment, and we were high and dry. So we ended up in the infantry. Around about, I think it was about December the 15th, they needed 50 individuals, including a radio man. And I was the only radio man in the group. So I was sent down with 49 or 51 other men, or 50 other. Anyway, we went down to Mindoro to set up an emergency air base that was supposed to take care of the airplanes that were going to come from Australia and land in the Philippines, which were our airplanes. And so we set this base up because we'd be there to service them, because I'm sure they'd need gasoline and servicing when they come up from Australia. And of course that never happened. So there we were, setting out in the jungle, really, and right on the edge of the jungle there in Mindoro, about, as I said, about January the 15th. And the Japanese moved in on us. I think they eventually took over this field. We had the field kind of concealed, and we were right on the edge of the jungle, the very edge of the jungle, but still much of our tents and whatnot, where we were hiding, were back in the jungle. And when the Japanese come in, we moved back. This actually happened to say we moved. We knew what was happening. We could sense it and feel it. So we took the few supplies that we had and moved them further back into the jungle, which was about, I guess, about 10 kilometers back up along a river. And when the Japanese did come in, we destroyed the gasoline that we had, and our few supplies that we couldn't move. And we went back up into the jungle, and we lived with the savages, actually. The people were in the Stone Age. And we stayed there, and when the rainy season began, we knew that we couldn't stay, so we left there and went across to on the island of Maricanas. And by that time, we found that Bataan and Corregidor had surrendered. So we tried to get to Australia, and we got picked up on Cuyo. We were on the island of Cuyo. And by the time that we were there, many of the men had gotten dysentery, malaria, and we saw the Japanese, when we were on this little island, we could see the Japanese ships moving in and their landing troops, and so we knew that capture was imminent. And the ones that were very sick, and from dysentery and malaria and whatever that may have been, I don't know. So the healthier ones, men, took off. They left. We told them to take off. And we had a little conference with them. We had I was the first sergeant of this particular group. And we also had a fellow named Sergeant Wilfon and a lieutenant. I won't mention his name because, well, I won't mention his name. But we had a little conference immediately, and Sergeant Wilfon said that he was 52 years old, and he knew he couldn't make it because if he stayed. And I volunteered, and being naive, I thought that we would all stay together. And so I volunteered to stay with the sick and the ones that were disabled. The other men took off, and we were captured then. And we went from there. They took us, the Navy people took us on an aircraft tender. And there was an aircraft tender and a cruiser that took us into Manila. And we went to the girls' compound with Pasay. And there at the Pasay, the old naval hospital that had been on Cavite, they had the personnel and the few medicines that they were allowed to carry with them were there at the Pasay. And I was there for about, I guess, possibly about a week when 300 people came down from Camp O'Donnell, where the horrible conditions must have been up there. And these people volunteered to leave thinking that they were getting into something better than what they had at O'Donnell. And some of the men, of course, had been through the death march, so they were in terrible shape. And the people at the hospital took 10 of the worst men in the worst condition in this particular group from O'Donnell, and they substituted 10 of us. And I was one of the ones that was on that was selected to go on that one detail. And we went down to Tayabas. And this must have been in about sometime, I'm trying to recall the dates, it's rather vague, but it must have been sometime about the 1st of June when this, 1st of June. And so 300 of us down to Tayabas, and what we were doing there was building a bridge across some river. I don't know what it was, but it was a river there that was practically just more of a little creek, but in the rainy season it would become more of a quarter of a mile in width. And we were building this bridge, and of course rainy season began, so there we were down. This was in the heart of the jungle. Took us down there, and we had absolutely no shelter at all, other than what you could get some sticks or whatnot and stick in the mud, and then get some of these palm leaves or and put over the top of these sticks that you'd put into the ground to sort of keep the rain off of you. But of course, when you did that, well, you also had a lot of mosquitoes that would come in there on you at night because we had no shelter, as I say. The Japanese did. They had tents up there with sides on and mosquito nets and that sort, but we had nothing. And along this river, they had up the stream where the Japanese took their water for their cooking and whatnot. Then they had the horses that they bathed and whatnot just below where the Japanese had it, and then we were below the horses. So, and I can remember that one of the cooks, to get this water clean, he would get the bucket and he'd use his sweatshirt. He used his undershirt to strain some of the manure out of this water, so we could cook our rice in. And we had the only thing that these cooks had to cook their rice was a wheelbarrow. And this wheelbarrow was straddled over a trench that they had dug, and they'd put the fuel in the trench, and their rice, they would cook it in this wheelbarrow. That's all, as prisoners, that's all we had. And the work that we were doing, we had wheelbarrows, and we'd move dirt from one end up along the bank there that we were cutting out, and taking this dirt to fill in the approaches to this bridge that they were building. And by that time, of course, it was mud, absolutely nothing more but mud, almost ankle deep. And the wheels, of course, the wheelbarrows became clogged with mud and clay. So then we got vines that we put through the wheel of the wheelbarrow, and along about 6 or 7 feet of vine, and we'd tie it together and have 2 men put a stick through this vine as it was tied, and the two men would pull, and another individual pick up the handles on the handles of the wheelbarrow and would literally plow a furrow down through the mud. And when we got to where they wanted to dump this at the approach to the bridge, why it wouldn't come out because it was soaking wet, so you had to shovel it even out of the wheelbarrow. And we were there for approximately a month, as I recall. And in that month, I think there was about 70, 80 of us that came back from that detail because it was one of the worst details that they had in the Philippines. And then when I went after they finally closed they finished the bridge. And as I understand, about a week or so later, some Filipinos had set gasoline in there and burnt the bridge down, so all the work was for nothing. But anyway, we went back. They sent us back to Bilibid then, which was the old Spanish penitentiary with 20-foot walls, and it was this hospital that had been at Pasay had been moved to Bilibid, so that and by this time I had malaria. I got while I was down in Tayabas, I got a very severe case of malaria, and when I got to Bilibid, while they were giving me some quinine, and incidentally, I also forgot to tell you. When I was down in Panay, I had malaria that I thought I was going to die. In fact, it was terrible. I'd get these chills and the fever, and one of the guards had called me Giant. I got to know him pretty well, and one night after I got into the area under my little shelter that I had there, I heard this fellow say, "Giant, Giant," whispering very softly. And I said, "Here," and he gave me his ration of quinine, and the bottle must have been a little container about 2 inches in height and maybe about 3/4 of an inch in diameter, was filled with quinine. And he told me to take it. Then he put his fingers to his lips and said, "No speak, no speak." And this Japanese saved my life. If it hadn't been for him, I know I would never have made it through, because I took this quinine and it did help. And of course, I suppose about a week later, then the detail was over and we went up to Bilibid. And I was there for a while. And from there I went to Cabanatuan, up and worked on the farm that they had up there. And this farm must have covered, I'd say, at least about 10, 15 acres. It was huge. And you would think that all the vegetables that they were growing there the prisoners would get, but that wasn't so. Most of the vegetables that they had that the POWs were working on this farm went actually for the Japanese garrisons that were in the area, and we got nothing but the remnants of what they didn't need. And I can remember weeding the radish patch. They had rows of radishes, and you'd weed these patches. And if you'd look and see nobody was looking, you'd take a radish and eat it, clean it off, and then put the tops back into the row so that there wouldn't be a missing radish. Of course, later that would wilt, but for the time being, you got by with it. And of course, if they saw you eating one of those, they'd probably killed you. At least you got a horrible beating. And then after that, I was at Cabanatuan possibly for about, I would say maybe about a month or two. And then I was sent, a group of us went down to another work detail down back again in Pasay. And there we were building a Japanese air base for the Navy. And this was just across the way from over a little ridge from Nichols Field, and the Nichols Field, as I understand, was an Army air base, and we worked on the Panay here, and we built this base for them.
Mm-hmm. The food was always bad in POW camps?
Well, no, the Japanese were a little bit more lenient. They were the Japanese, the Navy personnel were a little bit more lenient, and we actually had took somewhat. They had Koreans and some of the Korean nationals that the Japanese had eventually overcome, and they had these Korean soldiers, whatever they were, driving these old, very old Chevrolet trucks that they had confiscated on the island after the surrender. And each driver of these trucks had to make so many trips per day, and we found that we could sabotage their working on these trucks. We could do a little sabotage on them, that the engines weren't quite right, or they weren't had the power, so that they would have to make work into the dark, into night. So we made arrangements with these people. We'd keep your truck going if you would get some extra food, and that way we sort of bribed them, and we did get a little bit more. They were a little bit. We got a little bit more food by bribing these people, and it was so that we got by there. And I also forgot to tell you about when this came to my mind. When we were in Bilibid, when I was in Bilibid, there was somewhere or another, the Japanese had, probably some of the personnel in the hospital were trading food for thiazole pills, the old sulfa pills. But we, of course, had no access to that, so there was in the back part of Bilibid, there was a building there that they had been in the process of building into a hospital. And this building had plaster walls, and we took some of this plaster, and we had cornstarch. Cornstarch was in abundance, we could get that very easily. And we'd take this plaster and mix it with water, and get this cornstarch and mix it so that it looked like a pill. And we used the mold. We used some bamboo that we had made little molds out of, a piece of wood. Made a mold about the size of a thiazole pill. And then after we got these and they were dry, then very carefully with a razor blade, you'd put a V in it, and in these pills. And that was a critical part, because sometimes they'd break in two. And we'd take these pills and trade it to the Japanese guards that had venereal diseases or whatever, and we'd give them these plaster pills, and believe it or not, some of them come back and say, "Oh, very good, very good." So it was doing some mentally, at least it was helping them. But all this should have done was give them die. It should have made them constipated.
How old were you when you entered the service? You were very tall too, right? And what was your weight?
At the time when I was at the time that I was captured, I weighed 190 pounds. That was my normal weight. I was 6'4", 4 5/8". But when they finally released me in Nagasaki, because we had got to Japan on and we left the Philippines in December the 13th of 1944. There was 619 of us put aboard this Orioka Maru. It was a small vessel, but I think it was relatively new. It was an inter-island boat, and they put there was 3 holds in this ship that they crowded us in. I was in the second hold, and we were so jammed in there, so tight, that this was they put us aboard this vessel about, I guess it must have been sometime about 4 in the afternoon or 5 in the afternoon. They finished loading this vessel by 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and they moved us down into this hold, crowding us in there, and they'd jab us in there with the butts of their rifles. And when we got in there, it was so tight that you couldn't move. You were standing there, and you actually could hardly move from your spot that you were in. And I was one of the last ones down. We were down on a rope ladder into this hold, and I stayed near this rope ladder, and I can remember that by 9 o'clock that night that they had people that were further back in the hold from where they couldn't get any air, that had died from suffocation. And I also remember that sometime during the night there that some of the people had gone mad out of their head for the lack of oxygen, and I can recall them being hit over the head because these people had been, I guess I shouldn't say this, but somehow they had cut people and they became almost vampires. All this is recorded. I mean, it's there someplace in some of the books, so that I'm not, it's on record. And I realized that if I would, as tall as I was, or if I fell somehow, that I'd be tramped to death. So I put one of my legs through the rung of this ladder that I was hanging on to, and later on, then I put both my legs. I was sort of hanging, sitting on this ladder, this rope ladder, which I had a definite advantage over the other individuals in the hold. And also, I could get more oxygen. I could get more air because I was a bit taller than the individuals that were in the hold. And this was on the night of the 13th. On the afternoon of the 14th, we could hear bombing and shelling in the distance, so that we were in a convoy, and evidently the Americans had begun bombing and strafing these ships in the convoy. And about the 14th, on the afternoon of the 14th, then they began strafing the vessel that I was on, the Orioka Maru. And later that evening, they asked for some doctors to come up and help the people that were wounded on it and the dead that were up on the Japanese, because this vessel they were also evacuating all the Japanese civilians. So there were a lot of men, women, and children on this vessel. And when they strafed it, I guess it must have been absolutely horrible. And they asked some of the American doctors to come up to help with the sick and that were needed medical help. And when the doctors get up there, instead of letting them help, they started beating on them, because they said it was the Americans' fault that these people were. So they come down. The doctors took a horrible beating, and they come back down to hold. So that for some reason or another, they asked them to come up and beat them up, and then they sent them back down to hold, which didn't make sense. But I guess that's their philosophy. I don't know. But anyway, on the 15th, then they came over. The morning of the 15th, they came over and started bombing the vessel. And some of the Americans had got up during the night. The Japanese had taken off all of the living Japanese and the crew, and they abandoned the vessel and just left the prisoners aboard. And somehow, when they were in the morning, some of the prisoners had managed to get up on the deck, and when they started bombing and strafing it, they waved them off, and then the Americans quit bombing, and the ship was sinking by then, because it was also burning. And I had a friend of mine. I also might mention that I had a friend of mine that was in the rear hold. We had a lot of people back there in that hold, and many of them were from up in Portsmouth, Ohio. On I think it was 192nd Tank Battalion. So these fellows had all sort of got together because they were from the same group of same outfit. So they were back in the rear hold, trying to keep one together. And when they dropped this bomb in that hold, it killed practically everyone. And I had a friend of mine, Creighton Burns, that somehow survived, and it had blown a hole. This bomb had blown a hole through just a hole above the waterline, And Creighton told me that he remembers vaguely of climbing up through this hole and into the water. But he climbed through the vessel, and I see him every once in a while. But somebody then during the night. Also, I all forgot to tell you that when they started bombing on the 15th of the morning of the 14th rather, that they pulled up this ladder. I don't know just exactly when they did this. I'm kind of hazy about that. But sometime during the day, sometime on the 14th, because on the 14th they made me send this ladder back up. They pulled it up. But sometime on the day on the 15th, now when the fellows waved them off, they threw this rope ladder back down to us, and that's how we got out of the hold. But it's so vague, I don't remember. But I remember throwing a plank over the side, one of these planks that cover the hatch, that they batten down the hatches during when a ship is loaded. And I threw this over the side and took all my clothing off because they had issued us old British winter uniforms at Villabid when we were supposed to go up to Japan in the winter. It was in the wintertime up there. So I knew that with the shoes and whatnot that I had and the heavy clothing, that so we couldn't make it swim with all that equipment on. So the wool clothing. So we all stripped down to our underwear really and jumped over the side and used these planks to swim the shore. And I started out, I don't know, by myself with this plank, but by the time I got ashore, there must have been 6 or 7 of us hanging onto this plank, and got to, this was in the old naval base at Longapo when we got there.
But you
Am
got
I rambling on too much here?
No.
I feel that I'm missing so much. I also want to remember to tell you that when we were back, before I went to Japan, we were back at this naval airstrip that we were building on Panay, and on the 20th, we always kept a man in camp pretending to be ill, and it would. The guys, some of the men that were out on this supply detail would bring in Japanese and a paper that was printed in English. I think it was called the Tribune or some Japanese. It was American paper, but it was controlled by the Japanese, but it was printed in English. And on the 20th of September, I'll never forget that, they mentioned that people weren't supposed to get alarmed because they'd have aerial practice over toward Craigador, which was over a little bit south of in the area where we were. And sure enough, on the next morning, this was on the 21st, and the following day, we saw a lot of aircraft out there flying around, and we saw guns, anti-aircraft shooting at them, and we were kind of alarmed. I said, my heavens, these people, they have all these airplanes up there, they're in pretty good condition, and there's a lot of them. Well, these airplanes were American, and they came down and eventually started strafing. We couldn't see them, but they were strafing and bombing. And we thought, at the time, we didn't know that they were Americans. We thought they were still in this practice mode. And we thought, well, we saw the bombs leaving these airplanes. We could see the explosions, and we thought, my heavens, that's awful close to the hangar line. But we didn't know what their frame of mind was or what they're doing. So we just, that's the Japanese, they're bombing close to their hangars. And then suddenly, 2 airplanes come flying over us, and we saw this. That was the first time that we saw the star. That was on the American aircraft. And we waved at them, and they recognized us, and they rocked their wings. And then after that, all the airplanes that were doing is strafing and bombing on the Nichols Field in that area would pull out over our area because they weren't getting any hostile fire. And as they'd go, they'd rock their wings at us. And this happened on the 21st, 22nd, and the 23rd. And they were also bombing the bay. They caught a convoy in Manila Bay, and they worked that. I guess they worked that area over pretty well. But and then I'll get back to when we were back back to the story again when we were in Japan. We got in Japan in.
You were recaptured when you got off the Euro.
Yeah.
You were recaptured when you swam to shore.
Yeah.
Recaptured by the Japanese and taken by another ship to Japan.
Well, this was before, after the bombing, after they bombed Panay. I'm getting my stories all mixed up here. After they bombed Panay, I mean at Basai, where we were building this Japanese airstrip, then we moved us almost immediately after that back to Bilibid, and from Bilibid then we went on the Orioka Maru and into Japan. And
but when the Orioka Maru was shot up,
Yeah,
you got to
it was-
swim to shore,
it
and the
was-
Japanese recaptured you.
No, yeah, we got ashore after we got off the Orioka Maru, and they took us into a tennis court, and they kept us there for about, I would say, possibly about a week, and there was a lot of wounded, and they had one little spigot of water that was running, and it would take you forever to fill a canteen cup, and I think they just kept that deliberately, just a trickle of water. And I can remember I was sleeping about in the little area where you had, maybe it was the tennis court was enclosed with this chicken wire type of thing for to protect, to keep the balls from, when they were playing, years ago when they had been playing tennis on it, to keep the balls from going all over the place. But they had a little gate there, and I was sleeping possibly about 10 feet from that gate, and right next to that fellow, there was a fellow that had a very bad wound on his elbow, and it became gangrenous. And I remember that the horrible stench from his arm, and I remember they amputated his arm, but it didn't do much good. He died shortly afterwards, and he was a Marine. I think I remember his name, but I won't mention it.
How long were you?
Let's pause just for a second and change tape. Okay.
Okay. What kind of medical treatment did you get as a POW, Lou?
We absolutely none. When the wounded that we had, particularly on the second ship, I think it was the Oreo Maru, that after we left, they took us from the golf court, from the tennis court, and they put us on the second vessel. I forgot, might mention, while we were on this tennis court, they said they needed 10 men. They wanted 10 men to take them back, the worst condition. They would take them back to Bilibid. No, let me get my story. They put us on this second vessel, and we went up as far, we got up to about up to, I forget, anyway, they sunk us we went up to San Fernando from this tennis court. We went up to San Fernando, La Reunion by train, and they told us to get on. They put some of us in the boxcars, locked the boxcars, and they put some of us on top of these boxcars and said, if the Americans attacked us, wave them off. We get up there to San Fernando, and I was in. Some of them they had a jail there. Then some of the men went to the jail for the evening, that night, to sleep, and others of us were put into a theater. They came through this theater, and they said they wanted 10 men, some of the worst 10 men that were in worst condition. So they took these 10 men. They said they were going to take them back down to Manila. They took these men, these 10 individuals, and took them out to the edge of San Fernando. They had already dug graves there, and they beheaded these men. For some reason, I have no idea. But that's the cruelty that these people inflicted on deliberately. When you were on a work detail and they'd expected you to do so much work, and if you didn't, they would slap you around, hit you, and you had no rights. Even the lowest private in the Japanese army, if he had an inclination, and he felt that you had done something wrong, He'd make you stand at attention and then beat you in the face or hit you with the butt of the rifle. And I can recall on some of these details where they had every morning they'd have a roll call, and what you tried to do, they had lined you up in ranks of three in a rank, men in line, and you would try to get in the first line, and you'd always try to be in an odd number, because if they needed a group of individuals for some job, it always seemed like it'd take the even numbers. So you tried to be an odd man and tried to get up near the head of the line, because if something would go wrong at all, these people, the Japanese, would start out they'd be a little bit angry, and by the time they got down to the end of the line, they were completely berserk, and they'd swing at you with their rifles or whatever, and when they'd go back up the back line on the back, they'd hit these people that weren't even aware. They'd hit them with the butts of their rifle on their backs, and many of the individuals were injured by doing that.
You were beating yourself.
So that, and you developed a sort of a survival instinct, I guess, so that you would try to get up in the front line, try to be an odd man, of course, and it was just one of the things that you developed to preserve yourself. You actually, in the Japanese, you weren't a prisoner of war. You were a slave. You had absolutely no rights at all. And as I remember reading General Wainwright's story, and even he, the leading General Wainwright, the man that was in command of Battalion Corregidor, was beaten just by privates. That they had no respect for rank or anyone.
What kind of medical problems did you have other than the malaria you mentioned?
When we got bombed on the second ship we were on, when we got to San Fernando, they loaded us up on the Arroyo Rue, and we were there maybe about a day when the American found us, and they dropped a bomb in the front hold of this vessel, and killed a horrible number of people and wounded many of them. And then the bomb fell on a near miss on in the hold that I was on, and there was a big 18-inch beam that was across the hold, and normally they'd laid planks over these beams to seal this hold. But this beam came down, and people that were underneath it were crushed. And I remember I had a friend of mine, his hand was cut off, and many of the men were wounded, and from shelling, or from the strafing, and from the bomb fragments. And the Japanese would give you absolutely no medication at all. They came down, they did have two corpsmen with white robes on, and they were dabbing on these wounds. They'd come back and dab mercurochrome on them. Little red, worthless piece of stuff.
Did you ever catch beriberi or anything like that?
Yes, I had beriberi. I had beriberi when I was in Bilibid after we came off of the Tayabas detail, and your legs would swell up, and actually you could you try to keep your trousers or whatever you had, a piece of clothing that you had, and it would be in a matter of minutes it would be soaking wet, because the water would be oozing out of your pores. And some of the men were in such bad shape that I can remember when they'd turn over, you could actually, now this sounds ridiculous, you could actually hear the fluid in their body sloshing. And they gave them, in Bilibid, the doctors tried, they had some equipment there that they would, some medications that they would give you. And I also remember that they, while in Bilibid, they got this rice, and they got a bit of sugar with the rice and fermented the rice, and at a certain point it would develop, as the rice was fermenting, it would develop of vitamin B, and they would give you this soured rice. And up to a point, then if you take the profile of this, after it got up to a certain level, the vitamin B contact would go down because it became alcohol. And they try to get it just before it, and of course the alcohol would destroy the vitamin B, so they tried to get feed this sour rice at the height of its potency. It's crude. They also had, and they also had in these tubs that they were cooking this in Bilibid, cooking this rice. They'd have chard the rice that was right next to right on the kettles that they had, these big cast iron kettles. Take this burnt rice and throw it on the ground, and I'd see these people that had bad cases of dysentery would take this burnt rice and supposedly be good for them for the dysentery, and they'd fight over it like a bunch of animals. It was shocking. It was shocking.
When you came back, what kind of treatment did you need? What kind of medical treatment and
When I
treatment did you
came
get?
back, from there, we went to, on the second ship, we finally got on the third vessel, which was the Brazil Maru, and we got into Emoji. I was there for about, I guess it must have been about 6 months because of the war. We got into Emoji about the 1st of February in 1945. And when the war was over, we were taking us from Moji down to Nagasaki, and the Navy was already in Nagasaki, the American Navy. And when they put me on a scale, I weighed 120 pounds. I had lost 70, which was about the average. I think, considering, I think all the men, practically all of them, lost about 70 or 80 pounds of their normal weight.
And you're 6'5", so you looked.
Beg pardon?
You're about 6'5", so
yeah,
you're
6 foot. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they, from there, they sent us on an aircraft carrier. We went down to Okinawa. But also, I want to tell you, when we were after the war, when we were in Moji, B-29s came over and dropped food to us. And on the first time that they come over and dropped food, they had two 55-gallon barrels that were welded together. And they dropped this with a parachute, and evidently it was too heavy. And when it got to, I'd say within maybe about 100 feet or 150 feet of the ground, these barrels fell loose and fell to the ground. And the Japanese really retrieved these, and they brought them back into our camp. And all this material of food that was in these barrels, of course, became more of a mush. And that night, and Moji the camp I was in was a British camp. And they had this rice that they had gotten, and they had all the stuff that they had, this food that they kind of put it all together into these big vats and made sort of a goulash out of them. Anyway, they had a generous helping of food for the first time in almost 3.5 years. And then they come back and said you could have seconds, which was unheard of. So everybody went back and they loaded their mess kits or whatever materials they had to eat out of. They filled these up again for the second time. And finally the cooks come back and said, well, come in and help yourselves. So everybody went back to gorge themselves on this food, which it was the weakened condition you were in. But I want to tell you, I was so weak at the time, when I was in Moji, that I couldn't step up on a step. If I wanted to go up a pair of steps, I had to put my foot down on the step and then grab a hold of the rail and pull myself up because I couldn't lift my weight. That's how I knew I was dying. And I knew that I would never have lasted the following year. But this food, and I can remember eating this food and going back and laying down in an area where in my little 18 inches of allotted space that I had on this shelving that they had, there's beds or bedding. And I remember laying back down there, and now this is, people won't believe this, and but I could actually feel after about a half hour of eating, gorge myself on this food, I could literally feel myself getting stronger. I could feel my arms and legs, feel the life getting back into my body. And I've often wondered, I'm sure that in the third world countries, where the people are starving today, if there's any correlation to what the experience I've had, if they feed these people, where they will feel the same strength coming back in one's body. I'll never forget that. That was a sensation that I will absolutely never forget.
How do you feel about Americans now? I mean, we have lots of food, and maybe we take combat veterans or POWs for granted. What do you think about being back in America?
Oh, it's great. I mean, we came back, and we needed. I can say this. I know that from General Wainwright on down to the lowest private, they came back with mental and physical scars, and many of those scars had never been healed. Particularly, say the scars, both mental and physical, and we needed. It's hard to explain, but when you come back, you go back into society again, you have very little. You're completely lost. You've lost something. I can't explain it. You're something of your mentality, and you have no confidence in yourself. Your confidence is completely gone. You've been for 3.5 years. You have been beaten down to the lowest ebb of life, and then you try to recover, and you're doing it by yourself. We had no psychology. We should have seen psychologists, should have been there, but we had none. So you built this up in yourself the best you could, and many of them couldn't. Had a lot of suicide, a lot of people that became alcoholics, and it affects you even many times, even up to today, because I can remember waking up at night. My wife would tell me that the least little thing, I'd wake up. You normally, when a person wakes, he wakens slowly, But when I'd awaken, I'd come to with a start, and gradually that has gone away. I don't do that anymore, but I can remember for a good many years when at least little sound, or at least little noise, foreign noise that I wasn't accustomed to, I'd wake up with a absolutely wide awake. Just like you're like an animal you're never quite resting. You're asleep, but you're not in that deep sleep that you normally should have.
Do you think your body got back to normal?
Oh yes, I think by now, yes. I think I'm pretty well normal, I think. Mm-hmm. I also remember, want to mention, when we were in Bilibid, well, not Bilibid, but I was at Mojave. I was in this British camp, and I can remember one night my detail was to walk down the bottom. This camp was up on top of a hill, and down at the bottom of a hill, my job was to make salt. They'd take salt water and run it through a lot of sand, and then they'd take this concentrated salt water and pour it back through this. Repeat this cycle until this water became heavily concentrated with salt. Then the Japanese would take this salt and boil it. This water, after it had been run through the cycle 3 or 4 times, then they'd boil it out and it'd have salt. And I was on that detail. And I came back late one night, and they had fish. Now normally, if you had fish at all, it would be a slice of fish, maybe about 2 inches in diameter, 1.5 inches in diameter, and about maybe 3/8 of an inch thick. And that would be they'd give you that one slice. You'd get that maybe about once a month. But I come back and the fish was all gone. So the cooks, of course, the British cooks, they didn't appreciate the Americans at all. And they said, well, we got some fish heads. I said, well, that's fine, give me the fish heads. So they loaded my canteen cup. I had a GI canteen cup with fish heads. And I took these fish heads, they were fried, and I'd pour the oil that had come off these fish heads onto my rice. And up till that time, we had no. I remember we weren't getting any fat at all. So the base of your nose, between your fingers, and behind your ears, and down around your groin, your flesh would crack, your skin would crack because of the lack of oil, lack of fat. And when I took these fish heads and poured it on my rice, the oil, and it would help. And of course, the fish head, we very carefully eat everything, even the bone, because of the calcium. So when you take a fish head, you'd eat it very, very carefully, and it was delicious. You know, and today you couldn't. It's revolting, but back then it was delicious. But anyway, I had some other of my friends that were in the same condition that I was having, so I told them the next time they have fish, you just ask for the fish heads. So the guys would go back, and the British would be very glad to give you the fish heads, get rid of them. So before long, though, they found the secret, and the fish heads became a premium. So I gave my secret away.
So the food was pretty bad, actually.
Oh
when
my,
you talk.
terrible, terrible.
It's horrible.
We used to, it's surprising now, you're beginning to see it, but the average diet that we had while we were in the Philippines was daikon. You can see it now at the Kroger stores. It's like a big white radish, maybe about 2 inches in diameter, and usually possibly about 10 inches long, and about 2 inches in diameter. They used to take, we would got a lot of that in the Japanese, and we'd get maybe about 4 or 5 slices of that boiled in water, and that was the soup that we'd get. And that was it. You'd get this water, and we used to call it shadow soup. You'd take 55 gallons of water and get some vegetable, and on a bright sunny day, and you'd take that piece of vegetable and very slowly pass it across the barrel of water, and cast a shadow into the soup. And we called it shadow soup.
What do you
It had
think?
a sense of humor. That brought us through.
What do you think helped you survive?
I think the sense of humor. Actually, we joked we were in horrible shape, and yet we knew that someday it wouldn't last forever. We knew that someday we'd get back, and we joked about it. We made our sense of humor. Yes, that's just about the way to put it. Mm-hmm. I think even in the worst conditions, somehow or another we'll find humor in the situation. That's strange. And I've also wanted to compare something. I have I belong to the American ex-POWs, and I asked them if they'd gone through the same mental condition that we went through. For instance, we all made food become an obsession. So we'd ask the people would say, well, how do you make, they'd give you a recipe. Everybody was making recipes on bits of paper. You'd copy it down. How do you copy these recipes down? And I've talked to people that were in Europe, prisoners of war, and they went through that same condition. They had talked about recipes, the food that they were going to have when they got back to the States. And then they also had, everybody was going through a period where they were building houses. When you get back to the States, you're going to build a beautiful home. So they were designing mentally, or even in some cases, if you get some paper, they were designing homes in the same condition that happened in Europe. So that when you go through this very mental state where you have absolutely nothing, you have hope and build on something, and food becomes an obsession. Then you have building on a little bit of hope in the future.
You seem pretty self-sufficient, but how do you react to unkindness, either on part of, have you ever had unkindness as a result of medical personnel, or do you react in a different way just about unkindness in general?
Yes, I'll tell you. When I first came back, the first time I went down to the VA, this was back when they had the headquarters, or their main offices were down in the federal building in Cincinnati. And I remember going down there, and I was talking to a fella, and he was asking me some questions. Then I'd have the little space where you're supposed to fill in what happened to you while you were a prisoner of war. And I can remember going down there and explaining to him what my conditions were, what my physical condition was, and why I was there. And he said, now in Mr. Kolger, he said in about a few weeks, he says, they'll be calling you back at the hospital. Will you go back to the hospital? He said, when you go back there, he said, now tell the truth and don't exaggerate. And I'll never forget, I was shocked, I was hurt, because there's no way in the world to exaggerate the horror that you went through. You can't explain it. There's no words in the English language that could describe what a human being had gone through as a prisoner of war from the Japanese. And I'll never forget that. It was a blow.
Okay. There are other things you want to say about your POW experience, or about the way POWs reacted, or anything you've missed? You talked about the reaction at the beginning, about the reactions.
You know, I think as a prisoner of war for years, I wouldn't talk. I think I kept it to not realizing, not aware of what I was doing, but I wouldn't let this emotion, the feeling that you had locked up within you, inside you, it was a dark secret, I guess you'd call it. And then we joined this American Ex-Prisoners of War, which I had, and you find an individual there that is going through the same experience, and then all this emotion comes gushing out. And it was a therapy, and that was the best thing I ever did. I'll also say this, at the VA, they've done a tremendous job. I think they've been very helpful.
Well, I don't think you'd say if it wasn't so, Lou. So.
That's about it.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
No, that's
my emotions get the best of me, but it was the truth. Actually, I think the fact that you joined this organization, you're with your peers, and we all went through the same experience, and each of us, and I found out, not only myself, but all of us, had these emotions that were locked up, and you met people that understood, and it was a catharsis.
What does it take to understand? I mean, you go to somebody and you want to tell them something about, what does it take to understand? Is there any way to describe that?
Yeah. You see, it still affects you. It's still locked up within you because you've gone through this and you never completely erase it from your mind. It's always there. I'm sorry that I'm making a...
No, it's fine.
It's just, well, anyway, that's about the way it was.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate it, Lou. Thank you very much. It's an honor.